Cuba takes unusual step of convicting a citizen of murder in the U.S. Cuba has made a rare conviction of a man wanted for murder in Florida after he fled to the island to escape justice. Marcos Yanes Gutierrez, 21, a Cuban national, shot dead Palm Beach County Dr. Ronald Schwartz and fled to the island in 2015. The killer may have thought he'd gotten away with the murder, as Cuba traditionally does not extradite its nationals to the United States for trial. But as a further sign of thawing tensions between the two countries, a Cuban court has convicted Gutierrez of murder and sentenced to 20 years in prison. Prosecutors from Cuba and Palm Beach County worked together to secure the conviction. The Florida prosecutors had agreed to transfer the case to Cuba, and the May trial was public and open to U.S. "To me, this is a product of diplomacy," Phil Horowitz, a Miami criminal defense attorney, told the Miami Herald. "It also shows that in international cases, when there is cooperation between governments, justice can be done. The Cold War does occasionally thaw." Yanes Gutierrez had gone to the Jupiter Farms home of Schwartz in July 2015, accompanied by his friend Saul Retana Lopez, to ask the doctor to give Lopez his job back. When they began to argue, Schwartz grabbed his revolver from his bedroom and shot Lopez, wounding him, Lopez later told the cops. Lopez said that he then grabbed the handgun and shot Schwartz in the ribcage. Yanes Gutierrez picked up Schwartz's firearm and shot him in the head, the police report said. Lopez, who was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, and Yanes Gutierrez reportedly then ransacked the doctor's house, stealing jewelry and firearms before fleeing. Yanes Gutierrez immediately fled to Cuba. Florida prosecutors were working to extradite him in 2016, but in February that year the docket entries stop with a notation that simply says "warrant returned." Phil Peters, president of the Virginia-based Cuba Research Center, said Cuban officials told him that since Cuba was unwilling to extradite Yanes Gutierrez, they offered U.S. authorities the chance to try him on the island. "This is the first time the United States has put its faith in the Cuban court system and collaborated with Cuban prosecutors," said Peters. Marcos Jimenez, a former U.S. attorney in Miami, believes that Cuba may be trying to curry favor with the U.S. "That's pretty incredible, trying one of their citizens for a crime committed outside their country. I don't think any U.S. court would exercise jurisdiction over a U.S. national who committed a crime in another country," said Marcos Jimenez, a former U.S. attorney in Miami. Palm Beach prosecutors may have thought this was their only chance to get some sort of justice for the victim of the crime. The Cuban embassy in Washington confirmed the conviction on Monday. An extradition treaty does technically exist between Cuba and the U.S. but has fallen out of use following decades of animosity between the two countries. But former President Barack Obama initiated a noticeable thaw in relations, beginning in 2014 when he negotiated the beginning of normalizing relations with Cuban President Raúl Castro. That included lifting of some U.S. travel and trade restrictions, reopening of the U.S. Embassy in Havana and the Cuban Embassy in Washington, and in March 2016, he became the first U.S. president to visit Cuba since 1928. President Trump announced in June 2017 he was canceling Obama's deals with Cuba. This latest case could be seen as another step between the U.S. and Cuba improving relations. State Attorney Dave Ehrenberg tweeted last week that he was honored to have played a role in the case. Peters said that the case may have opened doors for the prosecution of other criminals who went on the run to Cuba. "I would not think they would be sleeping peacefully based on this case." In another case of cooperation between law enforcement in both countries, a U.S. ecoterrorism suspect accused of arson and vandalism was detained in Havana last week by Cuban authorities. Joseph Mamoudibe, 50, who had been on the run for 12 years, was then put on a plane to the U.S. to face changes.